afternoon, everyone. We're delighted to host Nancy Edwards, Professor Emeritus at the University of Ottawa, in her play, Rethinking Good Intentions. Before we get underway, I'd like to ask everyone to please either turn off their phone or put it on silent. And then we'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We're here on the York University campus in Toronto, which is situated on the traditional territorial area known as Toronto, whose current treaty holders are the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We acknowledge this as the territorial area of many Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And we also recognize that this land acknowledgement is only the first step in a process of reconciliation with our First Nations peoples. So without further ado, I will ask Nancy to please begin.
This was supposed to be a feel-good day. I've been on this bus from Freetown for 4 hours and I still haven't reached my destination village. Just now, Sarabu Junction, here you get taxi. Oh, the driver's calling out my stop. Whoa, not much of anything here. A few mud huts with thatched roofs and no canteen, no taxi stand, more chickens and goats than people. Oh, my gut's telling me I've made a big mistake. Maybe my parents were right when they tried to persuade me to join the military. I'd written to my mom and dad to tell them I was taking a posting with CUSO in West Africa. Mom was on the phone right away. Nancy, your father and I are concerned about your security. We think it would be safer for you to join the military. Mom, I don't think so. You know, I've wanted to join CUSO since I graduated. Teaching community health nursing in Sierra Leone is a perfect job for me. I just want to help. I'm 25 years old. This is the right time to travel. That was 6 months ago, and here I am, mucky bus tracks left behind. 2 teens offer to help with my luggage. One grabs my oversized army rucksack and pulls it around a big puddle. The other hoists my bulging suitcase on his head. Neck straight as an arrow, no head bobbing, just an exaggerated swing of his hips as he carries my load and dumps it in front of a veranda. An old man gestures for me to sit on a string hammock. Usai to go. To go Sarabu, how far is it and when will a taxi come and how much does it cost? The teens are looking wide-eyed at my impatient mumbo-jumbo. You get for ways small. Taxi, they come. Breathe. Calm yourself. Be patient. You're on West African time. You haven't been abandoned. It's not like they won't know who the foreigner is when they get here. Well, at least I don't need to pee. I don't see anything that looks like an outhouse. And I can't remember how to ask where the toilet is. Harness your public health bladder. You wanted adventure? Here it is. A taxi finally showed up. The driver was driving a car wreck. He wedged my luggage into the boot, tied it down with an old tire strap, and gestured for me to sit in the back seat. He slams the door shut with his backside. 3 turns of the engine and we're off. And I haven't even told him where I want to go, and I forgot to bargain for the price. 10 minutes later, we're swerving around chickens and children as we drive up the main road in Sarabu. He heads straight up to the convent. Somebody runs to call Sister Hilary, my new boss. Greetings, handshakes, smiles, and hugs. Welcome to Sarabu. We're so glad you finally got here. That night I slept with the flashlight my dad gave me under my pillow. I'm in African hands now. I'll give it my best. I didn't know how much I didn't know. This isn't my first time bridging cultures. I worked in the tropics of Australia, and I was a public health nurse in Newfoundland's outports. But this posting feels different, more foreign, more like a steep learning curve for me. My self-confidence is full of holes. It's taken a week to get my bearings, little things. I bought groundnuts from the market lady. Couldn't bring myself to buy that fish. Oh, that smell, those flies. I walked the full length of Sarabu's main road, forced a smile, as children call me foreign white person, yelling, "Pumwee, Pumwee." I've named all the resident geckos in my bedroom. Nancy and Kevin Reimer are Peace Corps volunteers who arrived about 6 months before me. They've helped to ease my culture shock. I bunked with them for a couple of nights in their modern model house in the village, and they showed me how to cook with local foods. Upland rice, covered in plus sauce. The local stew that's thick with palm oil, floating potato leaves, dried fish, and chili peppers. Actually, it tastes pretty good. I've moved into my small house on the hospital compound. It's about the size of a small trailer. And I have an indoor bathroom. And because I'm on the hospital compound, I have a few hours of electricity in the morning and in the evening. I'm getting used to lights out at 11 p.m. when the sounds of the African night wrap around me. It's time to write a letter home. I want to reassure my parents, and I need to reassure myself. Dear family, I've arrived in Sarabu. Everyone's very nice. I've met all the staff and students. I've been taken on a tour of the 124-bed hospital. Actually, the hospital and classroom facilities are better than I expected. And my new Peace Corps friends and I have decided to start a garden. We want to raise chickens, rabbits, and milk goats. It will be a great demonstration model for the local villagers. What was I thinking? I've never lived on a farm. The only pet I had as a child was a turtle. And we three Pumwee were going to demonstrate animal husbandry techniques in the tropics for subsistence farmers. I didn't disclose much in that first letter. Gloss over the stuff that was giving me the jitters and making me seriously doubt my professional competencies. My job description has changed. Nancy Reimer has my job. I was hired to teach community health nurses in the classroom. Sister Hilary sat me down and explained that I had been reassigned to supervise students' fieldwork. I tried not to show my disappointment. I barely feel competent to teach in English in the classroom, but fieldwork, that's another matter. I don't speak Mende. I'm not credible. I don't know the local customs. I'm a West African neophyte. Paul is an experienced community health nurse, and he's been assigned to orient me to Sarabu's primary healthcare program. He spends 3 weeks out of every month in the villages. Today, we're heading out to Sangama. Kevin loaned me these rubber boots. I thought they would protect against snake bite. I wore them without any socks, and now I've got blisters on my ankles. My fear is overwhelming my common sense. I don't even know how to respectfully greet a chief. I watch Paul. And who is the chief anyhow? All the men look like they're dressed the same to me. They all wear raggedy shorts tied up with rope around their lanky waists. Paul shakes the chief's hand, and the chief speaks first. Bua, mbua, besewe, gawiana, kaingoma, besewe, obiaba. And then it was Mende gibberish with tones. There was a lot of back and forth between Paul and the chief, and then Paul finally nodded in my direction. He had the chief's permission for us to hold an immunization clinic in the village. I pepper Paul with questions on our 3-mile walk back to Sarabu. Paul, how will the mothers be notified about the clinic? And what equipment do we need to bring? Paul, how are we going to keep these vaccines cold in this heat? I try to sound confidently enthusiastic. In truth, I'm barely holding it together. Paul accompanied me on many of those early village visits, and sometimes through his translation to Mende, he could cover my cultural gaps. But sometimes I dug in so fast and so deep that rescue was impossible. I wasn't keen to meet the paramount chief. I'd heard that he had many wives. I don't know why that mattered to me. Any more than one wife was an anomaly in my mind. The chief is the big poobah in our chiefdom, and he's a parliamentarian. He's dressed as a man of authority. He wears an embroidered kufi cap, a long, elegant robe. He has pointy shoes, a security guard in a khaki uniform on either side, and several goats in tow. Greetings and a discussion about health issues goes well, and then the chief gifts me a waist-high wooden statue. What am I going to do with that oversized carving? Paul, please thank the chief for his generous gift, but tell him I have no place for that large carving in my small house. Paul looks miffed. He doesn't translate the chief's response. On a ride back to Sarabu, Paul chides me. I'd made a cultural faux pas. Paul tried to cover for me, but my outright rejection was hard to explain. I need to rein in some of my Canadian boldness. I could have simply asked Paul about the gifting protocol and avoided my dumb mistake. I've been over-imagining today's visit to Blama. It's a small village, about 50 people, and I'm going to be meeting the village health committee. I don't feel ready. Joseph will drive us partway, and then we'll take a bush path. Joseph is a hospital's driver. He's a proud Mende man who speaks a bit of Creole, and he always wears a toque, even on the hottest days. We're taking the hospital van. It's the only vehicle the hospital has, and it's used for everything. To take students and staff out for clinics in the villages, trips to Bow to collect post and cash for payday, and travel to Freetown to get essential drugs and vaccines. I'm wedged between Joseph and Paul in the front seat of the cab. The students are in the back. I'm got the gear shift rubbing against my leg, and there's a crack down the windscreen on my sight line. I'm watching Joseph's driving techniques carefully because I'll be taking students out to the evening clinics. We're driving on the laterite washboard ridged roads, and our voices turn vibrato as we drive over the road. And at the crest of a hill, Joseph turns off the engine. Brakes, no, they work fine. We coast down the hill, up the other side. Pendulum swings until we come to a stop in the gully. And Joseph smiles. Another successful maneuver. We pile out of the van, and Joseph points to the bush path. All I can see is thick ground vegetation and rainforest. Paul explains the hiking protocol. The first person in the walking line spots the snakes. The last person in the walking line catches the snakes. Okay, I'll take the middle position. The chirps and twerps and tweets and the chatter of monkeys in the rainforest are just magical. Jump! Fire ants! They sting! And what are those black columns on the ground? They're pulsing. Soldier ants. They bite. We make our way along the bush path to the edge of the swamp. I smell it before I see it. A murky stretch of water lies between us and the village. It's thigh high today. We'll have to hoist up our skirts. Oh, the muck is squishing through my toes, and images of water critters are flooding my mind. We make our way to the other side as quickly as we can. I'm the only one who checks for leeches when we get to the other side. Paul introduces me to the village chief, and he introduces me to the members of the village health committee. There's a clerk, a sanitation man, a woman responsible for childcare, and a traditional birth attendant. The chief invites my questions. What are the common health problems of adults? Malaria and yellow fever. And what about for children? Malnutrition and diarrhea. Bad one for Pekin when rains they come. The sanitation man points to the newly dug well. He thinks it will help. Aisatu is the traditional birth attendant. She wears a white head tie, denoting her role as a sowe, a leader of the Women's Secret Society. Aisatu has attended 4 generations of births in this area. She works with 3 other midwives. And she's very pleased with the lessons that Sarabu Hospital has recently offered. She's learned all the songs. They help her remember the lessons. She hopes a younger woman will soon join their team. The chief suddenly frowns. All of our produce has to be head carried from the farms through the swamp to the road by the men. We need a bridge over the swamp. A bridge? I'm prepared for questions like how to prevent malaria. Has my role as a foreigner trumped my role as a nurse? Where does the chief think I can get funding for such a massive project? Paul, please tell the chief that funding for a bridge in this small village is not realistic. The village is too small. The chief looks neither surprised nor disappointed at my remarks. Paul must have made some adjustments in his translation, and I'm already feeling bad about my crass comments. This chief understands the roots of poverty in his village. I clearly don't. A school-aged child is chasing a chicken in and out of a hut. A door slams and the commotion stops. The hen's legs are bound with raffia. All eyes are on me as the chief gifts me the agitated bird. Whoa, its wings are flapping. Muhammad, please carry the bird. Squawking accompanies us on our way and walk back to the van. I maintain my middle position in the walking line. Our transportation challenges are getting worse. Students and staff members have doubled, and Sister Hilary has promised more immunization clinics to the chiefs in the local villages. Only 40% of the villages in her chiefdom are considered motorable. A bush path cleared with machetes so a motorcycle could squeak through, motorable. 2 or 3 palm logs laid over a stream gully, motorable. Our team has been debating options. All of my Sierra Leonean colleagues have argued for mopeds. I've argued for bicycles. Sister Mary, the hospital administrator, sided with me. Petrol was getting expensive and scarce. She bought us 6 flying pigeon bicycles in Bow. Today's the big day, my first bike ride in Sierra Leone. I'm trying to hide my enthusiasm. The students don't look like they think this is a good idea. We're heading up to Tungi. I've checked it on the map in my office, and it looks rideable. No major river crossings. We're going to be visiting a man who has tuberculosis, dry cough, as it's called by the locals. He was discharged from the medical ward, and we need to do the contact tracing. Joseph will drive us to the bush path, and we'll bike from there. We get our bikes out of the van, and we're ready to go. Is everyone ready? Oh, my tires are digging into the sandy path. It would be faster to walk. And this farm fence, oh, these bikes are so heavy, it's like weightlifting. And one log walking bridge. We get our bikes up on the bridge as we stumble across the creek. The riding is getting better. The path is firmer now, and the students are ahead of me. I've just lost sight of Edward, who was out in front. Where did that tunnel of elephant grass come from? Ouch! It's cutting my legs. Edward, Samuel, Bakri, wait up! Silence. This is perfect habitat for cobras. Go faster. And now a Y junction. Oh, was Tungi left or right? I can't remember. I'll rely on my sense of direction. You need to know that's not a good idea. I turn left, and the village isn't far, but it isn't Tungi. Toddlers cower in their mother's laps, and little ones run into the huts. They think I'm a witch. An old man comes towards me. He must be the chief. Mara, Bua, Bua, Besele, Bima, Milo. I try to pull together my pathetic mandate to explain who I am and where I'm going. Nya, Lima, Tungi, Lo. The chief shakes his head. That's my exit signal. Tungi isn't far. And the students have set up a mat under a big mango tree. The patient is there with some of his family. We start our questions. Is he taking his dry cough medicine? Sometimes. And how many people live in his household? And how many children are there? And how many wives? Any brothers or sisters? Do any have a cough? Have any left the village in recent months? Edward's keeping track of contacts and villages. 47 close contacts in all. They all need to be seen at Sarabo Hospital. Maybe some can be persuaded to go, but there's so much stigma associated with tuberculosis. Thorough contact tracing is impossible. Other villagers have gathered round, and we've got an impromptu pop-up clinic. There's a listless toddler with anemia and 2 young women with fertility problems, and an older man who has river blindness. He's guided by a child. We have so little to offer, just advice on who needs to be seen at Sarabu Hospital. Have we raised and then dashed hopes? I guess you're wondering about our trip back to Sarabu. Well, I managed to keep up with the students, no wrong turns, and I have time to come up with a supplementary bike riding option. Joseph is waiting for us where he parked the van. Who would like to ride back to Sarabu with me? There are no takers. Students pile into the van with their bike. Joseph urges me to join. I'm trembling on the inside, but not on the outside. We wave goodbye. I limp back to Sarabu. Arriving at dusk, I have 2 flat tires, the chain is off, and the seat is perpendicular to its normal position. I look like I've run a marathon. After that bike fiasco, the bicycles were just used for small trips around Sarabu, and Sister Mary bought mopeds for the public health team. Simple health education is so complicated. Some of our messages are getting lost in the cultural clash, and others are pragmatically impossible. Boil drinking water for children, health education 101, but not so fast. Girls and women head carry all of the firewood from farms to villages, and all of the water from streams and rivers and swamps for their entire household. Families only have 2 cooking pots, one for sauce, one for rice. There are no spare pots for boiling water. Feed your children the beans and Benneseed groundnuts that you grow on your farm. But what to advise during hungry season? When the bush is slashed and burned and the seeds are planted and everyone waits and waits and waits for the rains to come. Hoeing becomes a daily back-breaking chore, and the plants slowly mature. All of the local produce disappears from market stalls, and the price of rice triples. Take your peek in your children to clinic. We give that advice often. Masseray lives in Blama. She has 4 children, 2 18-month-old twins and 2 older kids who cling to her legs. They all have bare feet. The twins are undernourished and overdue for routine immunization. Masseray is worried about the smaller of the twins who's had fever and diarrhea in recent days. Paul advises her to take the twins to the nearest clinic. She will when she can, and when the farm work lessens, it's hard for her to carry the twins by herself. The health center is 6 miles from her farm. Are we asking women to do the impossible? Many villagers believe that infectious diseases were caused by witches. Measles was thought to be caused by a witch spraying hot water on a child at night, thus the red rash. Measles epidemics would tear through villages, killing children, especially those who were malnourished. And sometimes with a particularly bad epidemic, the chiefs would hire a witch hunter to quell the epidemic. The witch hunters usually arrived just as the natural course of an epidemic was coming to an end. The villagers thought that witch hunters had impressive success rates. I was baffled when I heard students use the word germcy when they explained the importance of immunization to mothers in the clinic. C was added to the end of an English word when that word did not exist in the English, in the Mende language. Germcy was a useless word, a pointless explanation. We shifted our messaging. The marclet, the immunization, will help the child fight the witches at night. The elders agreed. Trust the nurses. Marclets rid us of deadly smallpox. These marclets may protect our children. Tell God, thank ye. Illiteracy was a formidable health education barrier. In some villages, nobody could read or write. And rural primary schools were few and far between, and even if there was one nearby, the school fees were often unaffordable. Farming was how you fed your family today. We tried low literacy approaches, like demonstrations. At every under 5 clinic, there were always children and babies in the lineup who had fever or diarrhea. We'd unwrap a feverish baby and put it in a basin of water and cool it. And we showed moms how to make oral rehydration solution using a pint bottle and a bottle cap, measures that were available in every village. Tonight we're going to try something new. We're heading up to a village to do a presentation on malaria. We have a new battery-operated slide projector, and we think it's going to add some pizzazz and perhaps encourage villagers to show up. I have had 2 bouts of malaria recently, so I'm going to wear my lapa to try to keep the mosquitoes at bay. We arrive in the village and the students hang up a hospital sheet on a tree branch, and we project the first slide as a picture of a mosquito. The chief stands up. We have no mosquitoes that size in this village. Health messages dismissed. We tried puppets. They weren't part of the local traditions, but the students made imaginative creatures out of fabric scraps, and the children were pretty interested. They were especially keen on seeing how puppets were being manipulated behind the stage. But puppets had no credibility as storytellers, and the adults weren't interested. Our aha moment came one evening when we headed out to Bumpe to meet with the village health committee. When we arrived, Mr. Gambai, who was the superintendent of health inspectors in our chiefdom, was already in the barry in the courtyard where he was telling stories. And Mr. Gambai was a renowned storyteller in our area. Paul and I took a seat. It was going to be a while before we could meet with the committee. And Mr. Gambai went on and on and on. We finally canceled the meeting and left. Nobody seemed to notice that we were heading back to Sarabu. But we realized that oral storytelling was powerful and needed to be the taproot of our health education approach. And so we tried popular theater. We would write simple scripts about common health problems. We'd arrive in a village singing health education songs. The town crier would announce that we had come, and we'd be accompanied to the barry in the village with drummers and dancers. And everybody in the village would come out to see the performance. Our first drama was about hand feeding. Hand feeding was quite a common practice. Women would put rice pap and pour it into their hand and feed the infants. And sometimes they fed too fast, and infants could aspirate and develop pneumonia. The actress who is playing the role of the mom has a doll, and everybody's crowded around, and they're so enthusiastic, and they're screaming and yelling, and when the actor starts crying, throwing up her arms because the doll has aspirated, everybody's yelling with her. They're just so engaged. And the chief at the end of the performance says he has a solution. From now, Any man who wants to marry a woman in this village must provide a spoon to feed a baby as part of the bride price. Another evening, we planned a performance about hookworm anemia. Now, this was a larger village, and they had no potable water, no latrines, and no garbage pits. And they were locked into a cycle of fines and inaction with the local health inspector. Every 6 months, he'd come to do an inspection, observe that no improvements had been made, fine the community, leave, and 6 months later, he'd repeat. Of course, the health inspector is the protagonist in our play. We arrive in the village, having promised the chief that we were doing this drama, and who's there? The health inspector. What are the chances? We decide to go ahead with the drama. The inspector is sitting right down with the actors. I'm up in the back, and my knees are shaking. If I could have got out of there, I would have. The actors start the performance, and Mr. Inspector seems to be enthralled. Halfway through the drama, he jumps up and he says, "That's me! That's me! It's just like that! How did you know?" He laughed at the person playing his character, and at the end of the drama, he wanted to lead the discussion. The villagers wanted to break the cycle of fines and inaction. They'd find a way. A handful of doctors, nurses, and midwives staffed Sierra Hospital. Hundreds of traditional birth attendants attended deliveries and provided maternity care in the villages. 90% of the deliveries in our chiefdom were done by these lay health workers. Traditional birth attendants, for the most part, had no formal education. All were said to have strong hearts. I wasn't surprised that courage was considered essential for midwifery work. Most had learned their practices as apprentices, and few had attended formal government training programs. Traditional birth attendants were trusted, respected, even revered by the villagers, and many held leadership positions in the Bundu society as Sowe. Now, I knew nothing about the women's secret society when I first arrived in Sarabu, but I soon learned that every village had an area demarcated as the Bundu Bush, where women business was discussed and deliveries attended. The teens were usually formally initiated when they were 15 or 16, and for special celebrations, the Bundu Devil would make an appearance. The Bundu Devil was a Sowe who wore an intricately carved helmet-like wooden mask and her body completely covered in cloth and raffia. She would be led in a masquerade around the village, accompanied by drummers or dancers. I found Bundu devil dancing mesmerizing. The Bundu had protective rules that strictly forbid things like voyeurism and incest. And the Bundu was a social bastion that gave women voice and power. All of our female nursing students were members. None ever disclosed any details of initiation practices. It was a secret society. Along with other female members of our team, I'm often invited into the Bundu Bush to meet with the grannies, where they share their practices and challenges. In Mapende, we sit in a round mud hut, and the granny midwives share how they assess a belly woman and monitor progress in labor and how they resuscitate a newborn. And all of us tear up as they describe the strife of a recent stillbirth. In Foya, I'm invited to sit between two granny midwives where our bums sink into the prickly straw mattress on a rustic cot and our thighs touching. The grannies show and tell. They usually deliver the women on the earthen floor, which they sometimes cover with a lapa. And no, they don't wash their hands before delivery. The stream is too far away. A granny pulls a bamboo sliver from a crack in the dry mud wall. It's used to cut the umbilical cord, and sometimes they apply local medicine, leaves mixed with charcoal. It quickens cord healing. They are desperate to stop newborn tetanus, which they call soin-soin. It takes too many of the babies. We explain the importance of a tetanus immunization, a tetanus marklet for pregnant women. They promise that they will encourage pregnant women to attend clinic. In San, the traditional birth attendants talk excitedly about the havoc that witches can bring during a delivery, and my translator can barely keep up with the midwives. They're talking so fast. If a woman's labor is not progressing, she may confess that she has a witch. And if she has a witch, there is nothing they can do to help the mother and the baby. And if the mother and the fetus die, then they must be buried side by side, but in separate graves and far from the village. Some of these granny midwives have conducted post-mortem cesarean sections. They've seen the inner anatomy of women. And their burial practices have protected other villagers from the wrath of witches. Our trip to Oghenowede looks straightforward on the map, about 7 miles from the nearby hospital. It's taken us all morning to get here. I'm exhausted. We rode in a cramped lorry ride, and then we had to tromp through rice swamps, and we came to the edge of the river and managed to persuade a boatman with his wobbly canoe to take us across, and then the final walk to the village. As I sat in that dugout canoe, I was sickened with the realization that a woman in Oghenowede who had a postpartum hemorrhage had no chance of making it to the so-called nearby hospital. I met Kadiatu and Bo. Kadiatu was a traditional birth attendant with a lot of experience, and she had recently completed the formal government training program. She understood the importance of referring high-risk pregnant women to hospital. She told me her story. I was so scared. The young mother's labor was not progressing. I spent all night persuading her husband to let his wife go to hospital. And he finally agreed on one condition, that I would accompany his wife throughout her hospital stay. We arrived at the doors of the government hospital, and we were met by the matron and a midwife, and they shouted at me for taking so long to bring the woman to hospital. They wouldn't let me explain the reasons for our delay, and they barred my entry. How was I going to explain to her husband that I had abandoned his wife? Mother and baby survived, but Kadiatu was still feeling wretched about the whole incident, and I was incensed by her story. Traditional birth attendants were the referral lifeline for women in the villages. We had to work with trust and respect as allies if we were going to improve maternity care. Traditional birth attendants broadened my perspectives about maternity care and taught me a lot about their hardships and their determination and their courage. It was an ordinary evening clinic until it wasn't. The night is inky black, and mothers are sitting on low wooden benches, toddlers and babies asleep in their laps and their backs. It's kind of like an overnight sleepover. The students are in the barry setting up the equipment for the immunizations, and kerosene bush lamps are flickering. Out of the darkness, a woman runs towards Paul and I, yelling, "Swan, Swan, Swan, Swan!" She's clutching her baby, and the baby is convulsing, and its head is thrown back, and it's grimacing. Its face has got all the horrible telltale signs of tetanus. The mother is sobbing. She's seen this Swan before. Her first newborn died of Swan. And now this infant who was healthy at birth stopped suckling 2 nights ago, and she's so afraid he's going to die. And do we have some medicine? Can we take the baby to hospital? Please save my beacon. Oh, Paul, what are we going to do? There are so many women waiting for immunization, but we must ask her, does she have her husband's permission to take the baby to hospital? Her downcast eyes need no translation. Even with hospital treatment, there was little chance that infant would survive the night, but we knew it would not without treatment. Silence filled the van as we drove home that night. Images of that bereft mother clutching her infant were surely churning in all of our minds. She had increased our resolve to end Swan, a completely preventable disease. And we tried. We held so many clinics, and every village visit, every discussion with the chief, every home visit, we would talk about the importance of the Swan marklet for pregnant women. And we saw some improvements, especially from large villages. More women would come for the marklet, and the newborn tetanus rate started to drop in some villages. But our public health team was concerned. We didn't think that if the government stopped the immunization program, that the chiefs would demand its reinstatement. The Mende people did not yet own the vaccination program. Another cycle of dry and rainy seasons and more clinics. And then an ordinary day in the classroom. The louvered windows are open, so we get a bit of a breeze, and I'm mid-lesson when we hear singing from across the hospital compound, and there's a Sowe leading a group of Bundu initiates, and they're walking towards us. The initiates are wearing long strings of beads around their necks and layers of lapis. As somebody runs to get Sister Hilary, we know they have something important to share. Sister Hilary invites the Sowe to speak. The grannies have decided that the marklet for Swan should become part of the Bundu initiation ceremonies. Sister Hilary says we would be honored to bring the marklet to the initiation ceremonies. And I'm over the moon with excitement. Students, the lesson is over. Let's dance with the initiates. It was a turning point. There was no going back. They had invited us to join them as pro-vaxxers, and they had culturally integrated the marklets into their initiation ceremonies. From now, there would be fewer baby boys named Jibao and baby girls named Lumbe, Mende names meaning let this one live. I had mixed feelings about a trip to Shenke on the southern coast of Sierra Leone. I was looking forward to a vacation with friends. and time to recover from a recent appendectomy. But Shenge has a troubled history. It is the location where some slaves left on their tortuous journeys. And there were direct links to Canada. During the American War of Independence, black slaves who fought with the British were promised freedom and land in the Maritimes. Thousands of these British black loyalists moved to Nova Scotia. Conditions were beyond terrible. And 1,200 of them decided to return to the African continent, landing in the place they named Freetown. I knew nothing about this history, despite the fact that I had visited my grandparents in Nova Scotia almost every summer as a child. How was I so uninformed? In Shenge, we stayed in a basic government rest house. The paramount chief had children deliver us cooked meals twice a day. Every one of the meals was the same: a heap of rice with a piece of fresh barracuda on top, on a mauve plastic plate with a red chili pepper on the side, and the barracuda was scrumptious. I wrote my parents to tell them that I'd had an appendectomy and I was well on my way to recovery, and I talked about what we were eating and the languid swims we were enjoying in the ocean. My mother read my letter and turned to my dad and said, "Inglis, isn't barracuda a shark?" Busted. I botched the reassuring correspondence. Market day in Shenge is really hectic. There's a lot of to and fro from Shenge to Plantain Island, and the mothers are already lined up with their children at the health center when we make our way down to the beach. Men are head-carrying loads of fish in big baskets into a lorry and fire brigade style, and cramming petrol and oil and water in jerry cans into their boats. I haggle a ride on a rustic plank boat with a sputtering outboard engine. I must forgo Plantain Island, 14 Leone for the petrol and 4 Leone for waste time. Okay, we done ready for go. Oh, big waves out here. That ocean spray sure feels good. There's so many children coming to meet us on the beach. I don't think they see many Pumwi here. I asked the boatman, "Usai dem pikin go school," and he points back toward Shenge. Men on the beach are repairing fishing nets, and women are toiling in smoking shacks where the fish is cured. The pungent smoke stings my eyes. A teen offers to take us to one end of the island where there's the remnants of a barracoon, a prison-like structure that was a slave factory that an Englishman who was a slave master ran 200 years ago. As I stand looking at the remnants, my face flushes and my toes dig into the sand and shivers run through me. This land where I freely walk was a slave prison for people my age. The guide starts to wander away. He says, "Ade come." I think he understands that we need some time alone to absorb the tragic history of this area. I try to scrounge together my bits of knowledge about the slave trade, and I realize I know not a single West African story about the family dislocation and fracture experienced by the slaves. I vowed to learn more. The next day, work beckons and we take our staccato trip back to Bow over the bumpy roads. And I feel the tentacles of the slave trade that reach to Nova Scotia, my mother's province of birth. I felt uneasy and torn. I had lived in Sierra Leone for 5 years. I was trying to decide whether to extend my contract or to return home. I felt like I was betwixt and between two worlds. And my biological clock was ticking. I'd met my boyfriend in graduate school and he'd come out to visit me. Our relationship was serious and we were both tired of long distance dating. But we both knew that he wouldn't be able to live or work in a remote rural area. I landed an academic position in Ontario. I decided that, and reasoned that it would save the relationship and maybe I could build do some global health work from a Canadian base. Departure day has arrived, and as I take my seat on the plane, the enormity of the moment grabs me and weighs heavily on me. Tears are dripping from my chin. What am I doing leaving this country whose people I love? I have worked alongside so many Sierra Leoneans. Their character is in my psyche. I've taught them, I've learned from them, they've become my friends. I've changed. I'm less naive, more realistic, and maybe a little less arrogant. It was really hard to explain what it was like to live in the country. Culturally superficial descriptions were easy, and that's what I put in my letters home, but culturally rich descriptions were very hard to get across. My dad was genuinely interested in the fieldwork, and he asked me a lot of questions, but he was pretty intent on engineering solutions. And Nancy, why is there so much poverty in the country? Didn't you tell us that Sierra Leone is rich in mineral resources? Yes, Dad, but diamonds are smuggled out of the country and all of the mines are owned by international companies. The wealth does not trickle down to the villagers. Why isn't there more potable water? Wells aren't hard to dig. Dad, villagers sometimes worry that wells will be poisoned. Well, then build protection around the wells. But Dad, the ancestors have to be consulted about the location of the wells. What do dead ancestors have to do with potable water? Dad, ancestors look after the social well-being of the community, and if they're not properly consulted, they may get angry, and angry ancestors can bring harm to the community. My father thought my explanations were annoyingly unsatisfactory. In 1985, I made a short return visit to the country for a teaching stint, and then life happened. I got married, I moved to a new city, I had a child, I beat a cancer diagnosis, and I finally finished my PhD. By the time I was ready to return to global health fieldwork, Sierra Leone was in the midst of a civil war, a vicious war, that traumatized and upturned the lives of so many Sierra Leoneans. Sarabo Hospital was left a burnt-out shell after rebels attacked, and poverty got worse and healthcare faltered. Schooling was impossible for many children, and thousands of Sierra Leoneans left the country. A peace accord was finally reached and took hold in 2002. I thought about a return visit, and then, just as the country was making progress, Ebola hit hard, killing 1/5 of Sierra Leone's health professional workforce. Another hit was COVID, one setback after another. I've decided that I want to remember Sierra Leone as I knew it. Sometimes I wrestle with this lame and selfish excuse. Do you think I've slipped into complacency? My inner self has circled back. I'm retired now, and I still want to help. But I will do it as an ally from a distance. The stories of the Mende people tether me to those Mende people, and sometimes the stories bubble up unexpectedly. Like the time I was invited to a formal dinner of researchers and policymakers. The president of Canada's Institutes of Health Research invited me to make a few opening remarks. I planned to say something about nursing and research, my usual shtick. But I heard inner voices, and the midwives were speaking to me. Speak our truths, tell our midwifery stories, do this for our women and children. I was being pulled right back to the villages and right back to the bundu huts and right back to the women in the clinics. And so I told the stories. I told the story of Aisatu, the 80-something-year-old who had attended so many births and still sought training for herself and her mentees. And I told the story of our trip to Komende and the impossibility of women in remote villages getting access to emergency maternity care. I talked about that wobbly canoe, and I told the story of Kariatu and how she brought a laboring woman to hospital only to be reproached by hospital staff. A silence enveloped the room, and dinner guests shifted uncomfortably in their chair. I think what I saw was the images of women, with shadows of their forms, with women with white head ties, that the traditional birth attendants had held my shoulders as I told their stories. And I think momentarily we pierced the thick veneer of funding politics and scientific speak in the room. Yes, I left Sierra Leone, but Sierra Leone has never left me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for that remarkable performance. We will now break for about 10 minutes and then return for a panel discussion.
And thanks to our tech people who made it all happen behind the scenes.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. So we now have a panel discussion, and let me just quickly introduce our panelists. First of all, if you could just wave, Agnès Berthelot-Raffard is an associate professor in the School of Health Policy and Management. Oghenowede Eyawo is a professor of epidemiology in the School of Global Health. Omosalewa Olawoye is in she has a background in economics. She is in the Business and Society program and also director of the Tubman Institute. And James Orbinski, professor in global health and also director of the Dudley Institute for Global Health Research. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give a 2 or 3 minute reflection on the play, and that could get some discussion going, and if we have time after, we have a couple of questions. So I don't know who would like to go first. Okay, Eddie, please go ahead.
Okay, to begin, I want to thank first Nancy. As I was telling her on the side, she told the story very well, just like my uncle would do back in the day when I was quite young and we visited the village. So thank you for that wonderful storytelling and the memories that brought back for me personally. So I joined a bit late. I wasn't here when you started, unfortunately, because I was attending another engagement. But I noted a few things which I wanted to mention as part of my opening remarks. In your talk, you mentioned, you talked about storytelling using puppets and how that did not work. And for me, that was very interesting because it's all about context, right, at the end of the day. Some things here may work. Some people enjoy the puppets, like kids, because they're wondering, oh, what's going behind the scenes. But in terms of achieving the goal, using puppets as a tool for storytelling was not efficient. So that was the first thing I picked. The other thing which I think was very important was your point about traditional birth attendants and how they were highly respected and in some sense they were also feared, like revered in a very unique way. And that is the fact. I think part of the reason is because people believe they have a lot of experience. They've bedded very many pregnant women over time, and they've seen lots of difficult cases. So that was also something perhaps we can chat a bit further about. And just for the sake of time, I'll mention one last thing, which was related to the fact that when a woman was experiencing difficult pregnancy outcomes or in a state of emergency, they always wanted to go back and they first ask, do you have permission from your husband to receive care? That was very telling, and it's also something I picked up, and hopefully we can talk about that a bit further. So I'll stop here just for my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Oghenowede. James, you look like you're ready to share.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank Nancy for a really brave approach to imparting wisdom. Typically, professors, they give a parting lecture, or they write a book, or they do something, they make a movie or something like that about the salient issues. But using theater as a medium to embody and also to express wisdom, I just thought it was beautiful, so thank you for that. And then particularly so after such a long and highly distinguished career in Canadian contributions to global health. Nancy has, as most people know from the notes, she's a professor of nursing and clinical epidemiology, or population epidemiology, sorry, at Ottawa U, and has played a highly prominent role over many, many years, some 50 years, I think, in Canada in building understandings and systems and ways of approaching first international health, and then that morphed into global health. So just wonderful for you to present in the way that you did. My comments are, they're more just my personal reactions to some of the issues that you were raising. And one of the reactions that I had was that much of what you described is kind of like trying to use a roadmap for Canada to find your way in Sierra Leone. And it just doesn't match, right? And that's something that in my own life, I've learned over many years of similar kind of experience, and not just in Africa, but elsewhere. But that really, that sort of came out at me as something that was quite important. And then the other was that as I listened to you, I reflected again on myself and thinking, wow, how many times have I learned over my lifetime that my arrogance reveals my ignorance, right? And that is an insight and a moment of opportunity for learning. And then, you talked about at the end about when you discovered the story of the 1,200 freed slaves living in Nova Scotia, deciding to return and to create and to found Freetown, and your amazement that you didn't know this, right? And this wasn't, how could you be, as you put it, so uninformed? And I just thought, well, there are so many stories like that, right? So many moments where one realizes that there's a wealth of history, a wealth of currents and structures and forms of ways of being and ways of doing that shape contemporary reality. And that, I think that what really struck me was that the stories that become relevant are the stories that we choose to tell, right? And then that we demand be heard. Right? So I'd love to have your thought on that. And then the final one, there were many, I have a whole page here of thoughts, but the final one that I'd just like to share is the idea that, or at least this, again, this is just my view, there's often a bewilderment that people express when they realize a certain piece of history. They realize, oh, this has really happened? And I find it, my experience over my career thus far has been my amazement at the bewilderment that many people who work internationally and work in, first public health. And public health, I say that in quite an accusatory manner. Public health, development, and global health. There's this kind of bewilderment that's, oh, there's a history? Oh, there are forces and factors that have shaped this reality? And there's a kind of a view that reality, contemporary reality, is ahistorical. That there's no such thing as history. Right? And there's also a view that somehow in our deification of science, right, that of public health practices, and it was replete in many of just your language that you used, to describe, contact tracing, for example. There's this idea that somehow the science erases the necessity for history and for understanding the social and political and historical and cultural and also spiritual realities of community. Whether it's Sierra Leone or Indonesia or Siberia, all of these, every situation, every context, it's fixed in space and time, but it's not fixed in terms of history, in terms of a past that shapes the present, and that if we have the courage to try to understand, we can actually participate meaningfully in shaping a future. Anyway, those are just some thoughts.
Thank you so much, James. Very meaningful insights. Agnès, you look like you're ready to speak.
Yes, after all that James shared with you and us, it will be difficult to talk. But Nancy, I would like to thank you for your play. In fact, this storytelling, it's a wonderful way to disrupt and deconstruct the original and the, how we can say that, the usual way of knowledge transmission, And when I was watching your play, I was thinking about the fact that for me it appeared to be a journey. You gave us a journey through your own epistemic humility, which is generally not something we are used to see, where people from a country far away in terms of cultural, spiritual tradition go back and share a specific story. Generally, it's I know because I had this experience. But you deconstruct that and you give us another perspective. So, and I look at your play as, you also take the idea of, how I can say that, in a term of, I took some of my notes in my phone, so sorry. You gave us a mise en abîme of the storytelling. By your play, you do storytelling, but at the same time, you reveal what you learn from the methods with which you approach the community. So it's like you transmit to us something that you learn from this community. And I was thinking about what kind of the role of the play, the fact that you said that it was difficult to approach the community because illiteracy is a barrier to health promotion through the population. There is also the belief system that prevents this health promotion to disseminate usual way of knowledge promotion on knowledge dissemination. The fact that it was absolutely difficult to provide health, a piece of advice on health education. And I was thinking, what you learn on, do you think that the role of theater, drama, do you think that it could be operational, we could operate that in terms of method, community-based participatory learning, on how we could implement that? For example, do you think that in nursing school we should deconstruct the teaching that we are doing on learn people to use somatic way of learning? Because technically what you did today is remind us that there is the cognitive aspect of learning on knowledge production, on knowledge dissemination, but there is also a somatic way, and you bring that by what you organize, by this storytelling, and you do that also with the community. But do you think that it could be a method? What we need to implement this kind of method? Because I really, as professor, I really try to deconstruct that, to see that people share in their body, in their embodiment, something to say about their realities, how they see the world, how they understand, for example, a simple concept. We could understand differently a simple concept. Oppression, what does that mean for a specific person because of his embodiment, of their embodiment? So it was, yes, just the idea that popped up when I saw your play, and thank you again for that.
Okay, thank you, Agnès. And Sylvia, please.
Right, thank you. Again, I want to thank you, Nancy, for a wonderful play and a new approach to, or at least highlighting a different approach to offering aid. On a lighter note, I want to thank you for being a model for me for when I retire, because I for some reason, I just always want to see people who retire from academia and know what they're doing, so that I don't fall into the trap of, retiring from 5 schools because I'm bored. So thank you. This is one method. So thank you. Yes, and things that that hit me from today is, the idea of offering aid on the recipient's terms. As an economist, when we talk about the failings of microfinance, one of the things that we talk about is, offering. Thank you. Okay, offering help to people on terms that they don't want, and for you to offer some assistance, it has to be on the terms that they can accept. So when you had given the example of rejecting the chief's gift, that could have been, and I like that you really stressed that part, because that could have just been a point where they would have just shut down towards you, and that would be the end, and everything you have to offer and all the knowledge and everything would not have been received. So for me, it's really big that you showed that offering aid on the recipient's terms, listening to the people, not just saying, when James was speaking about, highlighting ignorance, not just saying, I'm just going to help these people because I know what they need. It's being on ground, listening to what they have to offer and what they actually need help with, and offering help on those terms. And then the other part for me was, highlighting the importance of culture. It's as different as the world is, we all have different experiences, different histories, different cultures, and as a result, that affects how we function. And so just highlighting that part, that importance of culture, that shows that if I'm going to offer assistance somewhere, if I'm going to volunteer somewhere, I'm not going to go there to volunteer as someone who knows what they need. I want to understand what they understand as well. I usually give an example in class where I say, it's like going to a doctor and saying, I have a headache, and rather than questioning what is wrong, the doctor just says, here, you're due for surgery next week for brain tumor. You have to understand, speak to the people. So I thought that was really great, hearing your conversations with the people. I thought that was worth highlighting. And then I'll just piggyback off something Ede had spoken about on, the highlighting the importance of patriarchy even in women's health. It's a battle that I don't know if we can finish in the next, I don't know how long. But the fact that it's still an issue and lives are still lost as a result, thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you so much. And Nancy, would you like to respond?
Oh, always. Is that on? Okay.
I may have turned it off, who knows. Thank you so much for your reflections and comments. Very helpful as I go forward with this. Maybe I'll pick up on a few things, and I won't do it in order, as some of you commented on a number of common things. But let me start with the context and structural determinants, because I think that is so important. And I completely agree that often we approach things in an ahistorical way. I think we have, through schools of global health, public health, and so on, we've had an awful lot of emphasis over the last 2 decades, really, on social determinants of health. But we often don't get to the structural determinants of health. And it's when you're talking about the structural determinants of health that you have to really understand the historical journeys and contexts that are still very much alive and playing out. Whether we be talking about residential schools for indigenous populations, the experience of apartheid in South Africa. I mean, we all have examples of Jim Crow laws in the United States, etc. Those are all structural determinants. And I think often in our public health practice, whether it be in global health or, right here in North York, we sort of stop short of getting into the structural determinants. And we tend to think of that history as something that is unchangeable. So it is, in a sense, that we can't undo the history. But the starting point has to be understanding that and how it continues to play out in current everyday life, and how it's embedded in policies and regulations that may have been put in place 20 years ago, and tax laws or whatever it is that continues to create certain inequities in our environment. So I really appreciated that. And when I talk about how was I so uninformed, my hope with mixed audiences that some people will immediately think about residential schools and how so many Canadians, I can only speak for myself, were totally uninformed about those residential schools. Didn't even know they existed, never mind when the last one closed, and all of the layers of impacts that it's had on Indigenous populations. So it's good to hear, what you thought about and what audiences think about and how you bring it, this story, which is specific to Sierra Leone, but how it resonates with whatever your experiences may be. I think also on stories, and several of you spoke about that, I think over time I have come to understand the power of stories. And if I just use residential schools as an example, I mean, now we have many more personal stories that are in our common literature about the experience of residential schools, and our Truth and Reconciliation Commission actually got people to talk about those stories. And I think the power of that personal story we can't underestimate, and so that's part of why I talk in the play about I did not know, and I still know few personal stories about the experience of slavery. I know, the patterns of migration and some of that, but the personal stories is what hits you as a person and hits your heart and makes you care and empathize and understand as a fellow human being what that experience might have been like. So I think we underutilize that, as you were also saying, the somatic nature of storytelling that touches us in a different way, and we tend to, in universities and in many programs, still rely heavily on the cognitive. So the cognitive is important. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater by any means, but I think the dilemma is how to put the two together. And I think it's great that in Canada we have a lot of forward-thinking work going on around knowledge translation and an openness to different approaches, whether it be storytelling or perhaps something more traditional. But it gives all of us a chance to, I think, explore using different forms of art, whether it be theater, song, poems, art on a wall, or whatever it is that helps us get our messages across. And it would be great to see more of that in our curricula. And I think it would bring in a lot of more interdisciplinary approaches in learning, because often the people who are in the fine arts programs and the theater program are not mixing with the health professionals. We've done better at mixing the sociologists with the nurses and the physicians, but we're still rather limited in sort of where we draw those borders about what's relevant and what's not. So I'll be keen to hear how you approach that. Let's see, a couple of other things. Reciprocity, and you talked about that, on whose terms we move forward, and I think reciprocity is so important, and the partnership, and really understanding what partnerships are about. And this is a very challenging area, I think, in global health, because often for somebody like myself who's going overseas, we are the ones who actually hold the funding, and we hold the terms of finance and many sort of the controls, which can interfere with a true partnership. It's, in my view, the partnership is never even. That's not what it's about. But we have to find how each member of the team can contribute and and build on all of our strengths. And the patriarchy, it's huge, isn't it? But it was interesting to see how the Ubuntu Society dealt with that in part. I mean, the requirement for any hospitalization that it was the head of the household, always a man, who had to make the decision. Because, you know, a decision to send somebody to hospital was a decision to stop somebody else's education or whatever. And there's better rules and regulations now and laws in effect in Sierra Leone, for example, that make maternity care and under 5 care and so on free. So that helps for sure on the policy side. But the Ubuntu Society was where women actually held power and voice. And that's not the case in every society. But it's also the Ubuntu Society that performed female circumcision, and the Sowe were paid for that, and that was part of their social security because they had no other social security. The government, as many African countries now, has outlawed traditional birth attendants performing births outside of healthcare institutions. They will allow them often to attend with professionals nearby in a hospital or a health center, but they have taken away the income for those women, and they haven't replaced it with any kind of social security that allows them to feed their families. So sometimes we're very quick to put in place things that we think are going to advance care and make evidence-based care and all of that more ready, available, and we may be actually introducing harm. And I've looked at the recent data for Sierra Leone, and the maternal mortality rate actually is the same as it was when I lived in the country. They have brought down the neonatal tetanus rate to basically 0, but the maternal mortality rate, despite TBAs not being allowed to do these deliveries, continues to be very high. So these are complex problems, and simple solutions alone won't fix the problems. We have to. And understanding the complexity of the problem has a lot to do with understanding the historical context, the structural determinants, the patriarchy, gender roles, and the culture in an in-depth way.
This is actually one I wrote. Okay, well, thank you so much for those reflections and very thoughtful response, bringing out again the meaning of what we just witnessed. So there are a couple of questions from the audience. So if I may, Nancy, how did your experience in Sierra Leone shape your understanding of how biodiversity impacts health equity and disparities?
It didn't. It probably should have, but I would say my blinders were on around the biodiversity questions at the time. In my last year, I did work with an integrated rural development program, which had a very large agricultural component, but I was involved in the health side of that, and I would say that the agricultural component was all about economic growth. So trying to help, farmers use different seeds and more fertilizer and planting palm oil trees and that sort of thing. So at that stage, it wasn't the direction of agricultural development. It's changing now for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. I mean, I guess your experience of it was of a earlier time. So then, now we're thinking about climate and environment and so on. Okay, so another question. How can global health initiatives address cultural practice related to minimizing health risks and promote sustainable practices? Should I repeat that? Okay. How can global health initiatives address cultural practice related to minimizing health risks and promotion of sustainable practices?
So there was a period, and I don't know if this is still sort of part of the way it's taught, you'll have to advise me, but where we simply categorized cultural practices as harmful, helpful, or neutral. Is that still done? And it was kind of a simple typology to have in your head as maybe a bit of a starting point. And, you know, I'm sure you have going through your head what that looks like. But it's just, so it has some utility, but there are so many cultural practices that don't neatly fit into that typology. And how do we think about this in a way that brings in the true depths of what culture is? Because it's like a prism, it's got so many facets to it. It's not just that mother's hand-fed. Mother's hand-fed in part because their mothers had hand-fed, and in part because they literally did not have any spoon except the large spoon that was used to serve the plat sauce on rice. And it was a practice that was supported, even though they knew that sometimes children develop pneumonia, but whether they sort of link the hand feeding to the pneumonia, because the aspiration happens and pneumonia takes some days perhaps to progress, I actually don't know. So let's just not be too simple about it. And we are taught, I think, and continue to teach about risk and risk factors, and that's a big part of our sort of epidemiological approach. But I think sometimes, and looking to others to see if you'd like to add to this, that moves us away from understanding the culture and what drives the culture. And it's almost too simplistic, right? It's like that simple typology of harmful, helpful, neutral practices.
Yeah, would anyone else like to comment on that?
Sure.
Oh, great.
Yeah, when I think of, just in the broadest possible terms, what is culture? Culture, I heard a nice little definition a few days ago that I thought, wow, that's really interesting. That's worth thinking about. Culture is that which has, that practice or that belief, or that combination of practice and beliefs that have allowed a community to survive across generations and or thrive, and also to explain the unexplainable, right? The mystery of life that somehow enfolds us all, or explain phenomena that no other intervention can explain. And I thought, wow, that's a really beautiful definition. I've really bastardized it. You know, it was much more eloquent than what I just said, but it's a very beautiful explanation. It strikes me that one of the things that public health, international health, global health practice over the last, 40, 50 years at least, has taken, and it's inherent in the taxonomy that you described, helpful, not helpful, neutral, is this kind of, culture is only seen relative to what I want to do, right? It's only useful, or it's not useful, or it's neutral, according to what I value, right? As an intervener, or as an outsider, or as an expert, or whatever, right? So I think, just even seeing that, what you've beautifully pointed out yourself, seeing that kind of ambiguity, that kind of illuminating that ambiguity, and also that power, a power or structural kind of perspective, is actually incredibly helpful. Right? It asks us to behave differently, and to think differently, and to behave differently.
Yeah, and we're all cultural beings, right? Influenced by many, many things, our particular heritage, but so much else. And I think, sort of picking up on one point you made there, James, that sometimes the way we look at cultural practices can lead to a form of othering, really. That's not the way we do it, it's the way they do it. And I think in the 70s and 80s for sure. That's kind of the way it was taught. I mean, there was a fellow from Toronto, I've forgotten his name, he was a family physician, and he was really interested in cultural practices and primary care. And there was sort of a book about the Greeks and the book about the Italians, and reflecting patterns of immigration that were prominent at that time. It was kind of like if you read that book, then you understood the culture of a Greek patient. But it was so, looking back, so simplistic. The culture is just so much more complicated than that. So it can only be a good cultural practice, in my view, can only be about just trying to understand where that other person is coming from. And whether they be Mende, I work with the Mende, or like that label doesn't matter. It's about what are their deep-rooted values and getting at that. So.
Thank you. So there is one final question, and it's to you, Nancy. What encouraged you to continue your journey when you were in a new environment and weren't comfortable? What made you stay?
Yeah, so I presume in Sierra Leone, she's referring to, I've had the opportunity to work in many other places as well. Well, I really went wanting to help, as I say, and maybe what sort of kept me at it is that I kept realizing how little I understood. So I was seeking to try to understand more. I can remember 3 months into the country saying, well, when I arrived, I didn't know anything. And then 6 months saying, well, at 3 months, I really didn't understand anything. And a year, well, boy, 6 months, was I ever naive? So maybe some thirst for understanding and just being with people who had so much, that I had so much to learn from them. It was very challenging work, but extremely rewarding work.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all of our panel members, and to Nancy. We have a little token of our appreciation for you. So maybe we could have one more final round of applause.